For 10 years, I lived in my own house like a shadow. For 10 years, my daughter in law treated me like a maid, and my son forgot I was ever his mother. But then came one text message: Mom, I'm just borrowing your bracelet for a bit. And everything changed. They didn't know that bracelet was worth $3 million. And they certainly didn't know that the woman they looked down on was about to make the whole world listen. My name is Margaret Ellison, 71 years old. For the past 10 years, I've lived in a 2-story wooden house on the outskirts of Seattle. The house my late husband George once designed by hand, line by line. He passed away 11 years ago, leaving behind thousands of memories scattered across every window pane, every picture frame. But perhaps the one thing he couldn't leave me was the respect of my own son and the perfect daughter-in-law he chose. I've grown used to being the old lady living off the family, the nagging outdated nuisance who ruins their dinner parties. But this morning, just as sunlight spilled across the kitchen window, a message arrived that changed everything. Grandma, I'm borrowing your old sapphire bracelet for tonight. It goes perfectly with my gown. Don't worry, I'll take good care of it. Love you, Amanda. I stared at those words and smiled faintly. That old sapphire bracelet she mentioned wasn't just jewelry. It was the first wedding gift George ever gave me in 1969. A white gold bracelet set with deep blue sapphires, handcrafted by a French immigrant jeweler. Its market value today is around $2 million, but to me, its sentimental worth is priceless. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, is the kind of woman who enters a room as if the lights owe her their attention. Tall, beautiful MBA in hand, and above all, a master at convincing my son that everything she wants is for the family. I once believed she was kind until I realized she looked at me not as family, but as an obstacle. For 10 years, I've lived with them in the house that was mine, yet slowly everything became theirs. Their living room, their kitchen, their garden. I, the woman who paid off every cent of the mortgage, became a tenant in my own past. I took a sip of tea and reread the message. That casual, don't worry, chilled me. Amanda never asked before taking things. She assumes nothing I own could possibly matter, or if it does, it's just old junk. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to George's old study, the small room where he used to write in his journal and organize our finances. The landscape painting on the wall hung slightly askew. I slid it aside, revealing a safe embedded in the wall. The code, 1949, George's birth year. Inside, among yellowed papers, was a folder I hadn't touched in over a decade. George wasn't just a brilliant engineer. He was meticulous. In his final years, he quietly cataloged every antique and piece of jewelry he owned, complete with valuation certificates, insurance documentation, and ownership records. Before he passed, he took my hand and said, Maggie, if the day ever comes when you're disrespected, don't argue. Use the law, not your tears. Back then, I thought he was exaggerating. This morning, I knew he wasn't. I opened the folder labeled Item 112, Sapphire Bracelet. Inside was the document: legal owner Margaret Ellison, appraised value, $2,000 dozen, full insurance coverage, number 3498A ELI. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard Holmes, our family lawyer and George's old friend. He answered almost instantly. Maggie, it's been a while. What's going on? I took a deep breath. Richard, I need you to execute Clause 4 in George's estate file. The sapphire bracelet has been taken without my consent. There was a pause. Then he said softly, Are you sure, Margaret? Once I file, the police and insurance investigators will act within the hour. There's no undoing it. I've never been sure of anything, Richard. After hanging up, I finally texted Amanda back. Of course, sweetheart. Enjoy the party. For the first time in 10 years, I felt in control. An hour later, the old landline rang sharply. Maggie Richards' voice came brisk and firm. The insurance companies filed the report. Local authorities have been notified. The bracelet's registered as a high-value asset. Immediate retrieval required upon unauthorized movement. I suggest you stay home while they handle it. I thanked him quietly and sat in the living room, gazing at the black and white wedding photo on the wall. George was smiling. I, shy and young, leaned into his shoulder. I wondered if he'd believe I was strong enough to do this. A cold breeze drifted in through the window, oddly comforting. By evening around 7, the phone rang again. Ethan, my son. His voice trembled. Mom. The police showed up at the Metropolitan Hotel. Amanda's been stopped at the entrance. They said she's carrying jewelry worth millions, reported stolen. What did you do? I did what any rightful owner would do when their property is taken without permission. Oh my God, Mom, she didn't know it was that valuable. You need to tell them it's a misunderstanding. I pressed my lips together. Ethan, what hurts me isn't that she took the bracelet. It's that you still believe your mother couldn't possibly own anything worth being held accountable for. There was silence, heavy breathing on the other end. Mom, I didn't know. I just thought those things were keepsakes. And that's exactly what people like her think of women like me. Ethan, quiet, old, invisible. But you forget my memory's sharper than any blade. I hung up gently. At 8, the doorbell rang. A young officer stood outside, accompanied by 2 men in suits, one from the insurance firm, the other a legal representative. Mrs. Ellison, we've recovered the sapphire bracelet. The individual carrying it, Mrs. Amanda Harper, is in custody for further questioning. Would you like to come to the station to confirm the item? I smiled faintly. No need. I trust my paperwork. Thank you for your efficiency. When they left, silence filled the house once more. I stood by the window, watching the garden George and I had tended for 40 years. The streetlight's glow brushed softly across the glass, as if he were still out there somewhere smiling. I felt no triumph, no revenge, only peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop being afraid. For years, I'd thought myself a ghost in my own home, walking through laughter that excluded me, hearing whispers that I should really move into a care facility. But tonight, with one call and one message, the world turned on its head. Amanda might have thought I was just a forgetful old woman clutching dusty antiques. She never realized that behind my silence was a system George had built, like a blueprint, records, codes, documents, insurance, all waiting for the day someone crossed the line. And today, that day came. Around 9, Richard called again. It's done, Maggie. The police confirmed the bracelet's value as filed. Amanda's being held for further investigation. One question: do you want to press criminal charges? I glanced around the quiet room, the same room that once echoed with my son's laughter and the footsteps of the woman I once tried to love as my own daughter. Richard let the process take its course. I didn't do this for revenge, only to remind them that disrespect has a price. I understand. George would be proud of you. After hanging up, I sank into the old leather chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the silence of my home felt true. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of being heard. I picked up my phone and typed one final message to Amanda. Don't worry, sweetheart. This is only the beginning. Then I set the phone down and gazed out the window. The Seattle sky was crystal clear that night. I knew that by morning the news would spread, the neighbors would whisper, but none of that mattered. After 10 years of being invisible, Margaret Ellison had returned not as a fragile old woman, but as a woman who knew her worth down to every number, every signature, and every sapphire that gleamed quietly in the dark. 2. I still remember the day Amanda first walked into this house. She wore a tight red dress, her smile so radiant it could have dimmed the Seattle afternoon sun. Ethan held her hand, eyes gleaming as if he'd just found a treasure. And I, wearing my gray sweater and a flower-stained apron, could only smile and welcome the woman my son called the love of my life. Even then I sensed something was off, not because Amanda was rude, but because of how she looked at me. It wasn't the gaze of someone meeting her future mother-in-law. It was an assessing glance, one that measured every inch of the house, the furniture, the person standing before her, deciding what parts of the past she planned to replace. I told myself I was being too sensitive. But as the years went by, I learned that an old woman's instincts are rarely wrong. Amanda is the kind of woman who knows exactly how to make others feel smaller than she is. When she speaks, she tilts her head, offers a half smile, and slips tiny grains of condescension into her words. You're so sweet, Margaret, she told me at our first dinner together. This house has that adorable old-fashioned charm. Ethan and I will probably just modernize it a bit. It needs to fit the times. I tried to smile back, but inside, her words screeched like a rusted hinge, warning me that everything familiar would soon be replaced. After the wedding, Ethan and Amanda moved in, claiming it would be easier to take care of Mom. I knew better. They wanted the house, the two-story wooden home in a quiet neighborhood close to the city, worth twice their apartment. George used to say, "Our home will always welcome our children." I believed him. But I never realized that in opening the door, I was letting in my own erasure. At first, Amanda played the perfect daughter in law. She helped in the kitchen, called me Mom in a syrupy tone. But soon her requests became orders. "Mom, I have guests tomorrow morning. Please don't fry anything. The smell lingers in the dining room. Mom, could you use the TV in your room instead? Ethan and I need some privacy." I stayed silent, thinking patience would keep the peace. I didn't want Ethan caught in the middle. But too much patience turns into permission to be dismissed. Bit by bit, pieces of my life were renamed. The 8-seat dining table George and I had used for 30 years was replaced with a modern glass set. The study where I kept his journals became Amanda's feng shui office. She spoke softly, but acted as if every corner of this house was territory to conquer. Once, while I was reading in the garden, I overheard her on the phone. "Can you believe she still grows roses? I'm thinking of redoing the whole yard. Add a pool, maybe a patio for parties. The place has potential. It just needs a few outdated things gone." I knew exactly what outdated meant. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry. Amanda never said thank you. When guests came, she'd introduce me with, "This is Ethan's mom. She stays with us for convenience." Not once did she mention I owned the house. I thought Ethan would see it, but he was lost in her orbit, working long hours, desperate for quiet when he came home. Every time I hinted that Amanda made me feel small, he'd sigh, "Mom, she doesn't mean it." "You're just being sensitive." I forced a laugh, swallowing the feeling that I was slowly disappearing. Then came the parties. Amanda loved grand gatherings with people I'd never met. And before everyone, she'd suggest that I rest upstairs. "Mom, you'd be tired with all those guests. Better stay in your room." One evening, I stayed downstairs, hidden in the corner of the living room. I heard her clearly. "She's nice, but outdated." I told Ethan it's time to think about a nursing home. We need this space for our future. Those words sliced through me. I didn't cry. I just felt part of my soul pinned to the wall beside the paintings Amanda planned to replace with her wedding photos. Over time, I stopped talking, stopped laughing. I was afraid that if I spoke, my voice would tremble with anger. Amanda mistook my silence for weakness. But in truth, I was watching every word, every gesture. Ethan changed too. When I mentioned missing jewelry, a pair of pearls, my mother's brooch, a silver frame, he chuckled. "Mom, you probably misplaced them. Maybe write things down next time." Then he'd turn to Amanda and murmur, "She forgets things lately. Please be patient." I heard every word. And in that moment, I understood Amanda wasn't just stealing objects. She was stealing my dignity, my memory. But I said nothing. I remembered George's words. "When they underestimate you, stay silent. Let them grow careless." 10 years. 10 years of being a shadow in my own home, listening to people plan how to renovate my existence. I once believed I truly was useless until that morning when Amanda's message arrived. "I'm borrowing your old sapphire bracelet." That word borrowing drifted through the air like a whisper, but in my ears it thundered. Because for the first time, she touched the one thing George left me that I'd never let anyone touch. And in that instant, every ounce of restraint shattered. 10 years of humiliation, 10 years of invisibility. Finally, I saw myself clearly again. I was no longer the old woman sent upstairs when guests arrived. I was Margaret Ellison, the keeper of George's legacy, the woman who knew the worth of every stone in that sapphire bracelet, and the only one with the power to decide when others would pay the price for their disrespect. And I had decided. After sending the text, "Enjoy the party," to Amanda, I sat quietly by the window, looking out at the back garden. Seattle's pale gray sky lay under a thin mist like tea smoke. The lavender bushes George once planted were still blooming a deep purple, even though I hardly have the strength to tend them. Strange how some things stubbornly keep living even when forgotten, just like me. My hand trembled, but not because of age. It trembled from the feeling of taking back the reins of my own life. For 10 years, I'd been pushed to the margins inside my own house. Today, for the first time, I was the one deciding. I reopened the safe in my bedroom. Thick files sat in neat rows under George's signature, each entry labeled in his slanted hand, item 110. Painting Italian school, item 111. Diamond brooch, item 112. Sapphire bracelet. Every piece had its own insurance certificate, ID number, purchase date, and a confidentiality covenant kept by the law firm Holmes and Meyer. George was so meticulous, he sometimes drove me mad. I used to tease him. Do you really think someone's going to steal my bracelet? He smiled and answered, I don't distrust thieves. I distrust human nature. That line echoed in my head as I picked up the phone and called Richard Holmes. Richard was George's closest friend and the lawyer who handled all my husband's investments. In the 11 years since George died, Richard had stayed in touch, Christmas cards, the occasional check-in, but I'd never needed him like I did today. The phone rang 3 times, then his voice came on Margaret. My God, how long has it been? 11 years, Richard. And I think you know why I'm calling. His voice dropped. Don't tell me the George protocol has to be activated. I answered softly, it does. A long pause. Then Richard spoke slowly, each word precise. If you're certain, I'll begin the process right away. Once I file, it will be treated as a high-value insured theft. Police will intervene within an hour. There's no pulling it back, Margaret. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I'm certain she just took the sapphire bracelet, and this time I'm done staying quiet. Richard sighed. George told me if this day ever came, he believed you'd know exactly what to do. I'll handle the paperwork. Keep your phone on you. I'll call it as soon as the insurer responds. I hung up and sank into the old armchair by the window. A strange feeling spread through my chest, not fear, not glee. More like a climber who's come too far to turn back and has no choice but to keep going. 30 minutes later, Richard called again. Everything's moving as expected. I've reached Grandworth Insurance. They confirm item 112, Sapphire Bracelet, is appraised at $2 million and designated for urgent recovery if moved without authorization. I heard papers rustling on his end. Then he continued, they've forwarded the information to Seattle PD. By protocol, within an hour, they'll locate and retrieve the item. Do you want me to tell you the bracelet's current location? No need, I already know. Amanda's at the Metropolitan Hotel at a charity gala. Richard went quiet for a moment, then asked gently, Margaret, let me ask you honestly, do you really want to take it this far, Richard? I've endured 10 years of humiliation in my own home. If I back down today, I'll have nothing left, not even my self-respect. He exhaled softer now. All right. George would be proud. I'll go with the insurance representative. When the police arrive, they'll need owner confirmation. I don't need to show up. Let them see that this useless old woman is still lucid enough to move an entire system. Richard chuckled under his breath. Just like George. Calm cold by the book. I'll update you at every step. I put the phone down and looked around the room. Everything was the same, the wedding photo, the wool throw George knitted, the vase of dried flowers on the table. And yet the space felt different for the first time in years. The room felt like it belonged to me, truly belonged to me. I brewed a cup of black tea, sat down, and opened George's old journal. His handwriting was still firm. If the day comes when you must fight, remember, you don't have to shout to be heard. Just prove with action that they were wrong to underestimate you. I smiled. George always knew. Outside, a fine rain began to fall. I pictured the scene at the Metropolitan, dazzling chandeliers, women in evening gowns, champagne flutes catching the light. And in the middle of it all, Amanda wearing on her wrist the sapphire bracelet she called old. I imagined her eyes when those blue stones flashed under the lights, convincing her she outshone everyone. And then when the police approached, when they asked her to remove the bracelet, when she realized that the old piece was worth $2 million and had been reported stolen, I wondered, would she think of me? Maybe she'd be angry, maybe afraid. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that the truth would finally sit on the table, clear as the numbers on the insurance certificate. Around 7:45, the landline rang. I picked up and heard Richard, Margaret. It's done. The police went to the hotel, recovered the bracelet, and invited Amanda to the station for questioning. I closed my eyes. In that moment, I didn't feel elation, only a light breeze within me, the breeze of justice restored. Thank you, Richard. Now I just need to rest. And Ethan, he asked, have you told him? Not yet, but I suspect he'll call soon. Sure enough, not 15 minutes later, my cell phone lit up, Ethan's name glowing on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. His voice was frantic, rushed, almost a shout. Mom, what on earth did you do? Amanda was stopped by police in the middle of the gala. They said she stole your bracelet, worth millions, I replied evenly. They're right, Ethan. Mom, this has to be a misunderstanding. Amanda only borrowed it. Please tell them it's not theft. It's a mistake. I smiled faintly, my chest heavy. Ethan, I spoke with the lawyer. The sapphire bracelet is my separate property, fully registered and insured. Amanda took it without permission. By law, that's appropriation. But Mom, did you have to make it so serious? I cut in we, Ethan, I lived here before you were born. This house, these assets, they're what your father and I built. I didn't make anything serious. I protected what's mine, what you should have been protecting from me. Silence. I heard him breathe hard, a chair scraping. His voice dropped unsteady. I didn't know, Mom. I didn't think Amanda would. You didn't know because you didn't want to. For 10 years, I've been pushed out of meals and conversations, and you kept thinking everything's fine. But my silence, Ethan, never meant I was stupid. A long pause. Finally, he whispered, What do you want now? I looked out the window, rain still pattering softly against the frame. I want nothing but respect. Sadly, it's the one thing you and your wife have never given me. I ended the call before the tears could fall. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the warm lamplight washing over our family photos. Ethan as a boy grinning in my arms, George fixing the roof, the three of us beside the Christmas tree in 1982. Everything felt distant now, as if it belonged to another lifetime. I don't know if the papers will pick it up tomorrow or what the neighbors will whisper. I only know that some part of me just came back to life. Not because Amanda was taken in, but because I finally remembered who I am. I am not just the old lady in an old house. I am Margaret Ellison, the woman my husband trusted enough to build a protocol to protect her. And tonight that protocol was activated, not for money, but for dignity. I stood, turned off the lights, leaving only a small candle flickering on the table. Its glow wavered across the old wedding frame. George was still smiling, his eyes saying, Well done, Maggie. You did the right thing. I brushed my fingertips over the photo and whispered, At last I've spoken for both of us. Outside, a distant siren drifted through the damp night. Seattle slept, and I, after 10 years, finally woke up. 4. The next morning, a fine rain fell over Seattle. Droplets clung to the window frame in long streaks, sliding down slowly as if the city itself were whispering something. I sat in the living room with a cup of hot coffee, listening to the clock tick. A whole night had passed, and my heart was still unsettled. The police had held Amanda overnight for questioning, and Ethan had vanished. His phone wouldn't connect. I guessed my son was wrestling with shame, anger, and the hardest thing of all, the truth. Because when everything is peeled back, people don't just lose their image, they lose the illusion they'd been living inside. Around 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Richard home, standing on the porch, rain on his coat. Beside him was a stranger about 50 tall, sharp-featured, with a calm, keen gaze, the kind of eyes that have seen too many of life's secrets. Richard introduced us. Margaret, this is Samuel Price, a private investigator I've worked with. I asked him to help me verify a few things from George's old files. I raised an eyebrow and invited them in. What's so urgent you had to come here first thing in the morning? Richard set a leather briefcase on the table and opened a thick file tied with a red string. Last night, after the police detained Amanda, I reviewed the times you told me things had gone missing. Do you remember? A few years ago, you called to say some small jewelry seemed to be gone, but later you said, I must have forgotten. I nodded, my heart thudding. I remember. Amanda told me I was confused. Samuel looked at me, voice low and steady. You weren't confused, Mrs. Ellison, and those items didn't disappear by chance. I traced at least 12 transactions at pawn shops and antique stores downtown. All of them have photos and descriptions that match items in your asset list. I set down my cup, my hand shaking slightly. Are you saying Amanda sold them? Samuel nodded, turned the pages, and showed me color prints, the pearl earrings, the silver brooch engraved ME, the small ruby ring I thought I'd dropped at the market last year. Each one was there clear as day, along with receipt serial numbers and security camera stills. The air in the room suddenly felt dense. Richard's voice softened. Samuel's been following her for over 6 months, ever since I noticed a few insured items were being reappraised far too often. I thought it was an insurance error, but Samuel found someone was quietly bringing reference photos in for valuation. Samuel added, at first I suspected an insurance scam, but after running facial recognition on the footage, I confirmed the person was Amanda Harper, your daughter-in-law. I leaned back in the chair. A wave of feeling crashed over me. Shock, anger, then hurt. So while I was blaming myself for forgetting, she was quietly pulling me out of my own memories piece by piece. Samuel opened another folder. We also found she used at least 3 different shops, always claiming the items were grandmother's heirlooms or gifts from her husband. Estimated total over the last 2 years is about $45,000. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. 45,000 for red dresses, high heels, and those well-deserved getaways. Richard gave a small nod, possibly more. We also discovered a secondary credit account Ethan didn't know about. Amanda used it for luxury purchases and cosmetic clinic bills. I sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the rain seemed to count the beats of my thoughts. Then I asked, why didn't you tell me sooner? Samuel glanced at Richard, then answered, do you remember the Protocol B George included in his will? Part of it allowed for discreet investigation if there were internal suspicions. He wanted to be sure every action would be backed by solid evidence before going public. We waited for her to make a big mistake, and the Sapphire Bracelet was the opening. Richard added, Margaret, if you hadn't called me yesterday, we would have initiated this process next month. But you got there first. I drew a deep breath and looked out through the rain-streaked sky. George always thought further ahead than I realized. Samuel placed another envelope before me. During the investigation, we also found Amanda had been in contact with an art appraiser named Mark Dunley. She sent him dozens of photos of your paintings, sculptures, and porcelain. It appears she was planning to sell those next. I opened the envelope to find printed emails. Mark, these paintings belong to my mother-in-law. She has no idea what they're really worth. If you can help me find discreet buyers, I'll cut you in for 20%. I read the line over and over, then laughed, not from humor, but from bitterness. She truly thought I was too foolish to tell the difference between George's collected pieces and bargain store decor. Richard spoke gently. Margaret, you have 2 options. 1, submit everything to the police now so they can add multiple charges. 2, hold it until the first hearing and use it as a decisive blow. I said nothing. In my mind, I saw Amanda in that red dress smirking as she told her friend I should go to a nursing home. Now she was in an interrogation room where those words would become evidence. I want to file now, I said firm. She's taken enough, not just things, she's taken my son's trust. Samuel nodded. I'll deliver the file to the chief. After they left the house, settled back into quiet, I sat for a long time at the table, spreading the photos out one by one. Each item was more than an object. It was a fragment of a life, the earrings I wore on our 25th anniversary, the ring I gave George when he was promoted, the brooch my mother pinned on me the day I left Boston to follow my husband. Amanda didn't just steal jewelry, she stole pieces of my life. And worst of all, for 2 years I believed her. I believed my memory truly was failing, that I was getting old and muddled. I doubted myself, and that is the most insidious crime. The phone rang suddenly. I picked up. It was Detective Laura Bennett, who'd handled last night's incident. Mrs. Ellison calling to update you this morning's statement is underway. You may want to know that Mrs. Harper, Amanda, is claiming she didn't know the bracelet's value. She says you lent it, and she doesn't understand why she's being accused of theft. I gave a small, even laugh. Of course she'd say that. But you have the evidence, don't you? We do. And now we have more. Your attorney, Mr. Holmes, just submitted the additional jewelry sale file. She doesn't have much room to deny anything. Thank you, Detective. I trust the law to do the rest. When I hung up, I leaned back and closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my lids, I saw George smiling and I whispered, I did it, George. I kept my promise to you when they belittle me. Let the law speak instead of tears. In the afternoon, Ethan came home. His face was drawn, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept. He wouldn't look at me as he crossed the threshold. I poured him a cup of hot tea and slid it toward him. You're here to apologize, aren't you? I asked. He looked up, hoarse. So, you know everything I do. I just saw the entire file. Amanda stole from me and from you. Ethan clasped his head in his hands, trembling. I can't believe it. Mom, I've been so stupid. She made me think you were losing it. Every time you said something was missing, she'd say, old people forget. And I believed her. I sighed. Trusting someone you love isn't a crime, Ethan. But refusing to see that's a fault. His voice broke, eyes shimmering. What do you want me to do? It isn't about what I want. It's about what you need. You need to relearn how to see people. As for me, I'm going to take back what's mine. Ethan nodded wordless. For the first time in 10 years, I saw something in my son's eyes that wasn't pity for an old woman. It was genuine respect. Outside, the rain kept falling, but I knew a different rain inside me had finally stopped. That night before bed, I cracked the window and drew in the cold, damp air of Seattle. The scent of lavender still drifted on the breeze. I murmured to no one, it's over, George. The performance has ended. But I also knew this was only the first act. There were still shadows and lit secrets Amanda hadn't had time to reveal. And I once treated as invisible was finally ready to look straight at all of it. 5. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Bennett. Mrs. Ellison, we need you at the station to confirm your statement and the recovered property. And you may want to say a few words to Ms. Harper. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. I knew this moment would come, but my heart still felt heavy. After all, Amanda once called me Mom, even if it was performative. All right, I said, I'll come. The Seattle Police Headquarters was cold and white bright like a hospital. When I walked in, an officer led me down a long hallway and through a heavy metal door. In a small room sat a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a one-way mirror reflecting a sickly light. Amanda was there. No red dress, no high heels. She wore a gray top, her hair in disarray, her face so pale I almost didn't recognize her. But her eyes, those eyes still held the same look, angry, bewildered that this was actually happening. The moment I entered, she sprang up, voice sharp and shrill. You did this to me. I sat down calm. No, Amanda. I protected myself. I only borrowed the bracelet. I was going to return it. You're acting like I'm a criminal. I looked straight into her eyes. You sold at least 12 items over the past 2 years, Amanda. There are receipts, video, photos. Do you remember those pieces? Or will you say they were all just borrowed too? She went silent. For a moment, her face trembled and curled into a bitter smile. You hate me. You want to ruin my life. All because I won't be the obedient daughter-in-law who submits to you. I frowned slightly. No, Amanda. I don't hate you. I'm just tired of the way you belittle anything that isn't yours. At that moment, the door opened. Ethan walked in, worn out, eyes adrift. Mom, he murmured, may I stay? Amanda spun toward him, pleading, Ethan, I swear I didn't do anything wrong. Your mother is making this up to drive us apart. Ethan didn't answer. He looked at me, then at his wife. The look mixed pain and recognition tightened something in my chest. Amanda, he said slowly, I've seen all the evidence. I can't believe it, but it's true. Evidence. Amanda laughed, a sour, brittle sound. Oh, sure, they fabricated it. They stitched photos together. They want you to turn on me. Ethan said nothing. He pulled a color print from his pocket, a shot of her at a pawn shop, the pearl pin bright under the light. This is the store on Madison 3 months ago. Do you remember? Amanda's color drained. She stepped back, her voice faltering. I needed money, Ethan. I only wanted to provide for our future. Your mother doesn't need those things anymore. She's old. She doesn't even remember. I sighed softly. Do you see, Amanda? That's what hurts most. Not that you took things, but that you taught my son to believe his mother's memory couldn't be trusted. Tears streaked down Ethan's face. I knew guilt was chewing through him inch by inch. Detective Bennett stepped in, voice professional. Mrs. Ellison, we need to confirm whether you intend to withdraw your complaint. If not, the case will be forwarded to the prosecutor this week. The room went perfectly still. I looked at Amanda. Her fingers dug into the table's edge nails, leaving pale grooves, lips trembling. You can't do this to me. I have a future. I watched her for a long moment. In that instant, I didn't just see a thief. I saw a woman lost, swallowed by greed and pride. But compassion cannot replace justice. I spoke slowly. Amanda, you had 10 years to behave decently, to respect the person who gave you this roof. You chose contempt over gratitude. You took from me, lied to my son, and made me doubt my own memory. And now you ask for mercy only because you fear losing your freedom. She broke down, collapsing into the chair. I was wrong, okay? What more do you want? I stood, eyes steady. I don't want anything. I just want you to remember that every time you look down on someone, especially the elderly, you're digging your own grave. Then I turned to Detective Bennett. I won't withdraw the complaint. Let justice finish its work. On the way out, Ethan walked beside me without a word. Rain started again, cold drops slapping our faces. I had no umbrella. I didn't care. At the parking lot, he stopped, voice ragged. Mom, I'm sorry. I don't deserve to be your son. I rested my hand on his shoulder. You don't have to say that. Your biggest mistake wasn't loving the wrong person. It was letting someone teach you to forget who raised you. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. I let the rain and tears blend together. What will you do now? I asked. I'm filing for divorce. I can't live one more day in a lie. I nodded. Do the right thing, Ethan. Not for me, for yourself. That evening when I got home, the house felt strangely peaceful. I made tea and sat at the old wooden table. Outside, the rain had thinned to a soft tapping on the roof. I opened a drawer and took out our wedding photo. George still smiled, their eyes bright as ever. It's done, George. Our story has finally closed the right way. I said it softly and set the photo down. On the table, the returned sapphire bracelet lay in its velvet box. The blue stone caught the warm lamp glow, shimmering like my husband's eyes once did. I touched it lightly. The coal at my fingertip tightened my chest, not from regret, but from remembering. I understood that life would be different now. I would no longer be silent for the sake of peace. I would live honestly, speak plainly, and help others. Those elders dismissed by sons, daughters-in-law, and sons-in-law stand up. No one has the right to make us doubt ourselves. No one has the right to strip our dignity just because we've grown old. I looked at my reflection in the window and whispered, if someone is belittling you, remember, silence isn't peace. It's the trap contempt sets. Before bed, I logged into the old social media account Ethan once made for me. I wrote a short post, no tags, no names, just a message for anyone walking through what I had. Don't let them make you forget your worth. Sometimes you must let the law speak for you instead of tears. If you've ever been belittled, comment 1. I want to know I'm not the only one who's been treated this way. I pressed post. 10 minutes later, there were dozens of comments. Older folks, middle-aged women, even younger people. They said they'd been dismissed, judged, robbed of self-respect. Someone wrote, "Thank you, Margaret. You reminded me I still have a voice." I watched the screen glow in the night, feeling like one candle catching light from hundreds of others. Sometimes victory isn't in courts or cells. It's in the moment we realize we're no longer alone. I smiled faintly and turned off the lamp. Seattle was calmer than any night before, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the truth. Have you ever been belittled, hurt, made to doubt yourself? If you have, comment 1. I want to know I'm not the only one who's risen from contempt. 6. 3 weeks had passed since Amanda was arrested. I thought it was over, that the nightmares of betrayal and deceit had finally left me. But like any old secret, once you pull one thread, the entire web of lies begins to show. That morning, I got a call from Detective Bennett. There was a weight to her voice that wasn't usually there. Mrs. Ellison, I think you should come in. We've just received the results from the search of Mrs. Harper's home. There are things you need to know. I didn't ask anything else. I only said I'll be there right away. At the station, I met Richard Holmes and Samuel Price, the private investigator. They were waiting in a small conference room, a thick file on the table. Bennett began. When we searched Amanda's house, we found a hidden room in the basement locked with a separate code. She called it a storage room, but inside we found more than expected. She set a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside were printed emails, copies of sales contracts, and an external hard drive. Samuel folded his hands and spoke slowly. Amanda wasn't just selling your belongings. Margaret, she's been running an illegal antiquities pipeline connected to several figures in the appraisal world across 4 different states. I went still. My God. How could she? Very cleverly, Samuel said. She leveraged the social connections her husband made at charity events. Amanda quietly took photos and gathered information on wealthy families who own older art pieces. Then she fed that to a group that buys them, really professional art thieves. Bennett added, according to FBI files, this ring has been active for nearly 6 years. Amanda is a key link, the scout and broker. It felt like the air was pulled from my lungs. So my house? Richard nodded. Yes, your home was one of their meeting points. We've confirmed from the GPS history on her phone that at least 8 associates came by at night while you were sleeping. I trembled, fingers laced together, sickened and deeply wounded. All those years I thought she was merely a haughty, ill-mannered woman, and my home was actually at the center of a federal crime. Samuel opened another evidence bag and took out neatly folded pages. And this is the part that may hurt most. These are printed emails between Amanda and another attorney named Harold Klein. I looked at Richard. He understood immediately and explained Harold Klein is a specialist in inheritance law. From what we read, Amanda was exploring a petition to declare you legally incapacitated. I stared. What Richard slid the pages toward me. I opened them and read the first line. If we can establish that Mrs. Ellison suffers memory decline or a confusion syndrome, then her son as legal guardian will have control over all assets. After her death, all real property will pass to him and his current wife. I sat motionless, eyes fixed on the words. My chest ached. She didn't just want to steal property. She wanted to strip me of dignity and mind. I remembered the morning she told Ethan I was forgetful, that I talked to the dead. She made me doubt myself, made my son believe I was slipping, so that later whatever forged documents she prepared would look reasonable. She prepared everything Bennett said, quietly. She even recorded a few of your conversations, heavily edited to highlight repeated stories and present them as memory loss evidence. I laughed, a hoarse, breathless sound. Good Lord. All that time I even felt sorry for her. I thought it was a generational clash. I didn't know I was living with someone dismantling me piece by piece. Richard laid a hand on my shoulder. You weren't wrong, Margaret. You were trusting. No, I shook my head. I was loving. I loved my son so much I shut my eyes to every sign. The room fell silent. No one spoke. Only Seattle's rain tapped steadily at the window. That afternoon, we returned to my house to secure documents. When we opened the basement, everything felt both familiar and foreign. The wooden chair Amanda once said to toss for space, the shelf she called too shabby. Now I understood how she'd used every corner of this home to stage her scheme. Samuel checked the back wall and tapped. A section sounded hollow. He pried it gently with a screwdriver. Inside was a hidden compartment where Amanda had stashed a hard drive, contracts, and a handwritten ledger. In the notebook, I saw small, tidy lines: 214 contact MD about Turner painting, 221 monitor Emma's health old woman forgot meds for third time, 3-3 schedule with Harold inquire about power of attorney. My hand shook as I read. She charted each step as if scripting my downfall. Samuel turned to Richard. With this, the FBI will formally expand the case. She won't just face theft charges, but conspiracy to convert assets and falsification of medical records. Richard nodded. I'll call the DA's office. They'll need Mrs. Ellison as a primary witness. I spoke softly, voice dry. I'll do it. George always said, if they try to steal you with words, strike back with facts. That evening, Ethan came by. His face was gaunt hair, rumpled like he hadn't slept in days. He sat across from me, eyes down. I heard he said quietly, they said Amanda is tied to an antiquities theft ring. I didn't answer right away. I poured him tea and asked, did you know what she planned to do to me? He looked up, eyes brimming. Yes. They showed me the plan she sent the lawyer. I couldn't believe it. Mom, when you forgot to take your pills when she wrote it down and used it as evidence. I'm so stupid, Mom. I live right next to her and saw nothing. I gave a sad smile. Sometimes love blinds us. I don't blame you, Ethan. What matters is that you see clearly now. He lowered his head onto my hands and sobbed like a child. Mom, I promise I won't let anyone hurt you again. No one. I stroked his hair, warmth rising in my chest. Perhaps amid the wreckage of trust, a mother's bond is the one thing that can't be stolen. A week later, the FBI officially stepped in. They asked for a detailed statement. I told them everything from the first time Amanda called me Mom, with that syrupy voice to the day she laughed when I forgot where I'd left my keys. When I finished, the agent, a middle-aged woman with brown hair, said softly, Mrs. Ellison, your story will help many people. We've seen cases like this, but few stand up the way you have. I looked out the window at a red sunset washing over the city. I'm not doing this for recognition. I'm doing it for people like me, for the elderly who are belittled, manipulated, and silent. I've been quiet long enough. She nodded, smiling with respect. That night I got home late. On the table, the sapphire bracelet still rested in its velvet box. I opened it and let the moonlight spill over the blue stone. In that light, I saw not just an asset, but the memory of a life of trust and betrayal. I touched the gem lightly and murmured a prayer, George. I've found justice for us. More importantly, I've found myself again. I closed the box and blew out the candle. In the darkness, I saw more clearly than ever, no one can steal a person's light if that person knows how to rise in the night. 7? I never imagined that at 71, I would once again step onto a witness stand in a large courtroom under cold white lights, facing lawyers, prosecutors, and the lenses of cameras. But life always finds a way to make us stand up, even when we think we're too old to fight. That morning, Seattle was drizzled with rain. I put on the dark blue trench coat George bought me on our trip to Chicago in 1990. Before leaving, I paused in front of the mirror and looked at my face lined with wrinkles shadowed by sleepless nights. But in my eyes, for the first time in years, something was unmistakable. Conviction. The courtroom was packed. Outside, a few reporters waited. I heard them whisper, that's Margaret Ellison, the woman who put her own daughter-in-law in prison. The story's all over social media. They're calling her the Sapphire Widow. I smiled faintly. The name sounded theatrical, but I wasn't a grieving widow. I was simply a woman who chose not to be robbed of the truth. Richard walked beside me, slow but steady. He murmured, are you all right, Margaret? I've waited 10 years for this moment, Richard. I'm better than all right. We entered. Amanda sat at the defendant's table. She wore a beige business suit, light makeup, trying to seem composed. But when I walked past, her eyes slid away as if she herself couldn't bear to look at the consequences. Ethan sat in the back row, head bowed. I knew he was still wrestling with guilt, but he was here today to see the whole truth, unfiltered, unmanipulated. The trial began. The prosecutor, a young woman with a crisp voice, stood and said, Your Honor, this case is not merely about theft. It shows how greed can ravage a family and how silence can be weaponized to exploit someone deemed weak. My heartbeat slowed. Every word sounded like it was speaking for me. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stand. The room went quiet. I placed my hand on the Bible, took the oath, then lifted my head. Amanda's attorney, a salt and pepper haired man, approached, striving for calm. Mrs. Ellison, can you explain why you believe the defendant took the sapphire bracelet? I answered. Because I have proof. The messages, the insurance file, and my lawyer's confirmation. She took it without permission, and that was only the tip of the iceberg. Do you have evidence? The defendant intended to appropriate it? I looked at him, then straight at Amanda. She didn't just take the bracelet. She took many other items. She sold them, and she planned to strip me of ownership by fabricating that I had dementia. I have copies of the emails she sent her attorney. A murmur rippled through the room. Amanda bowed her head. Her lawyer faltered, then rushed on Mrs. Ellison. Perhaps you misunderstood. Elderly individuals, often I cut him off, my voice steady. Don't lecture me about the elderly. My memory is better than that of everyone who tried to deceive me. I know every brick in my house, every scratch on the table. George built by hand. I'm not senile. I was silent until they crossed the line. A beat of absolute stillness. The prosecutor smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. After the lunch recess, the FBI presented evidence of the antiquities ring Amanda was involved in. Photos, emails, transaction lists appeared on the screen, each one slashed into the perfect image she'd constructed. The prosecutor said the defendant didn't only victimize Mrs. Ellison, she exploited social networks to steal from many others. The estimated total exceeds $1.2 million. Whispers spread across the courtroom. Amanda began to tremble. She looked to Ethan, but my son only shook his head, eyes cold and sad. I felt no glee, only a deep emptiness. Once I had wished she would love me like a mother. Now between us stood the wall of the law. 3 days of testimony passed. On the final day, the court delivered its judgment. The defendant, Amanda Harper, is sentenced to 12 years in prison for theft, financial fraud, and conspiracy to appropriate inheritance. The gavel fell. Amanda burst into tears and collapsed into her chair. Ethan covered his face. I closed my eyes and inhaled, not out of joy, but because justice had been carried out at last. Richard leaned toward me and said softly, George would be proud of you, Margaret. I smiled gently and replied, I'm not sure he'd want to see this, but he'd understand that I kept my promise. After the hearing, I stepped outside the courthouse. A rare, soft sun warmed Seattle after weeks of rain. Reporters surged forward microphones, raised Mrs. Ellison. Do you have anything to say to those following this case? I stopped, looked at them, and spoke slowly. I only want to say this: if someone is belittling you, remember, silence won't protect you. Truth is the strongest shield. The sentence was captured instantly, broadcast on the news, and spread across social media. That evening, when I returned home, hundreds of messages flooded my account. Strangers, acquaintances, middle-aged women, elderly people living alone. They all wrote, "Thank you, Mrs. Ellison. You made me believe that justice has no age." I read every message, my heart suddenly light as the wind. Not because they called me a hero, but because I knew my small story had touched others. That night, Ethan came over. He sat beside me for a long while, silent. Then he spoke, voice tight, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. I turned, smiling softly. Mothers don't get to give up. No matter how many times you go astray, I'll wait for you to find yourself again. He rested his head on my shoulder, a small sob escaping. I stroked his hair the way I did when he was little. Outside, moonlight spilled through the window, glinting off the sapphire bracelet resting on the table. I whispered, as if to George, "We've made it through the storm, haven't we?" A few months later, a journalist asked to write about me. The headline read, "A 70-year-old woman teaches America about courage." I didn't care about fame, but when I read the comments from strangers, I understood that my story wasn't about revenge, it was a warning. For those suffering quietly under their own roofs, for those who believe silence preserves peace, for those who've forgotten that dignity has no age. One afternoon, as the lavender in the garden bloomed a vivid purple, I sat by the window and wrote the first lines of the book. So many urged me to write. I titled it Amid the Dark, the Blue Still Shines. The story wouldn't begin with pain, but with awakening. I didn't want to write Amanda as a villain, but as proof of how greed can make a person forget their humanity. I didn't want to write myself as a victim, but as someone who learned to stand straight after being forced to her knees. And I knew that no matter how much time passed, that sapphire bracelet would remain a symbol not of money, but of conviction, intellect, and resolve. I had written half a page when I looked up. Seattle's golden sunset stretched long across the room where I had once felt so alone. Now it was full of light. I smiled and added one last line: when they belittle you, smile and quietly gather your evidence. Because one day justice will need someone to stand up, and it might as well be you. 8. 1 year after the trial, I sat in my small study beside a stack of freshly delivered books. On each silver gray cover, the title, Amid the Dark, the Blue Still Shines, shimmered beneath a sapphire blue gem. When I ran my fingers over the surface, my heart trembled not out of pride but disbelief. I had never imagined I would come this far. Margaret Ellison, once dismissed as the forgetful old lady, was now being invited to universities and community centers to speak about justice, resilience, and the dignity of age. Life, it turns out, has a peculiar way of rewarding endurance. Sometimes we must walk through the darkest night to find our own light. On the first day the book was released, I received hundreds of letters and emails. Some made me cry. A woman from Texas wrote, "I'm 65. My daughter-in-law looks down on me, takes my pension, and calls me useless. After reading your story, I went to the local legal aid center. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak." A man from Florida sent a handwritten note. "You made me rethink how I treat my mother. I owe you a thank you." The letters piled high on my desk, their scent of paper mixing with lavender from the garden outside. Each one felt like a piece of someone's heart learning to heal. And I realized George had been right all along. One righteous act can save not just one person, but an entire generation losing faith in goodness. That April, I was invited to speak at the University of Washington at a seminar titled Justice and Resilience. I wore a blue coat and the white scarf George once gave me. As I stepped onto the stage facing hundreds of faces, students, professors, elders, I no longer felt alone. I once thought I was too old to change anything. I stayed silent to keep the peace, afraid of being a burden. But silence saves no one, it only convinces the guilty they are right. The hall fell utterly still. I spoke about George, about Amanda, about 10 years of living as a shadow in my own home. But I didn't tell it for pity, I told it so that anyone hearing could recognize themselves and find the courage to rise. When I finished, a young woman stood up, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mrs. Margaret, you didn't just tell your story. You told it for thousands of us who are ignored. Thank you." The applause thundered and lasted so long that I had to bow 3 times. That moment wasn't about me. It was about the power of truth. Afterward, a middle-aged man approached. He introduced himself as the director of Silver Voice, an organization supporting seniors who suffer emotional or financial abuse. He said, "Mrs. Ellison, your story moved us deeply. We'd like to invite you to be an honorary advisor for our new initiative, Justice Never Ages." I was taken aback. "I'm just an ordinary woman, not a professional speaker." He smiled. "Exactly. Because you're ordinary, your strength is extraordinary." I was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll do it." That evening, I told Ethan. He was helping reorganize my office filing book contracts. He smiled, eyes full of pride. "I knew you'd say yes. I used to think you just wanted peace, but now I see you're stronger than ever, Mom." I laughed softly. "Maybe old age is its own kind of freedom, Ethan. When you have nothing left to lose, you dare to do everything." He hugged me tightly, and in that embrace, I knew we had finally healed. The months that followed became a new journey. I traveled across states, Oregon, California, Texas, standing on stages telling my story. At each stop, there were faces that lit up, hands that held mine, voices whispering, "Thank you." The media began calling me the woman who awakened America's conscience. I didn't feel grand. I just felt alive. Once, after a talk in Dallas, an elderly Vietnamese woman approached her, hands trembling as she took mine. My daughter in law mistreated me too, she said. She took my pension, said I was losing my mind. But after hearing you, I went to the police. They're helping me now. You are my light, Margaret. I squeezed her hands and our tears met. I realized light doesn't belong to one language or border, it only needs a brave heart to ignite it. One summer evening, I came home from a long trip to San Francisco, tired but at peace. I walked into my garden, the lavender still bloomed purple as ever. Under the warm light, I saw my shadow stretch long across the grass, aged but upright. I thought of George, his calm, steady voice. If you can turn pain into strength, you'll live forever in someone's memory. I smiled and whispered to the sky, "Do you see George?" I did it. A month later, Justice Never Ages launched officially. I stood among elders who had been deceived by their children, betrayed by friends, forgotten by society. Each carried a story, but shared one belief: justice is never too late. As I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight caught the sapphire bracelet on my wrist. The blue light shimmered softly. I no longer wore it as jewelry, but as a symbol, a reminder that light can be born from ashes. I spoke to the crowd. I don't tell my story for sympathy. I tell it to prove that no matter our age, we can still stand tall. If someone tries to silence you, remember silence protects them, not you. The audience rose, applauding endlessly. In their eyes, I saw understanding, and I knew I wasn't just retelling a story, I was passing on a flame. That night, when I returned home, a handwritten letter from Ethan waited on my desk. I opened it, Mom. I used to think justice belonged to lawyers and courts. Now I know it begins when someone dares to tell the truth. Thank you for teaching me that. Your son, Ethan. Tears fell, but they were the gentle kind, the kind that wash away pain. I knew the cycle of hurt had ended here. Amanda had paid through the law, and Ethan and I had been repaid through awakening. I placed the letter beside the velvet box holding the sapphire bracelet and closed it softly. No anger, no hatred, only peace. I turned off the lights, stepped onto the balcony, and looked at the glowing city. Cars streamed by, people hurried past, no one caring about the life of an old woman. But I knew somewhere among millions, a few were standing up because they now believed something I once said: justice has no age. And with that, I smiled and breathed in the cool night air. Seattle's sky was impossibly clear. The sapphire's soft blue gleam flickered once more, reflected in my eyes. No longer a symbol of the past, but the light of a new beginning. 9. One autumn afternoon, Seattle turned crisp and quiet. The maple leaves outside my house had begun to redden, drifting softly onto the brick path George once laid. I was brewing tea when I heard a knock at the door. The mailman handed me a thick, carefully sealed envelope. In the corner was printed Federal Correctional Institution, Phoenix, Arizona. I froze. Beneath that line was a name I thought I'd never see again: Amanda Harper. I sat down, the cup trembled in my hand. It had been over a year since she was sentenced. I hadn't thought of her, or rather, I had tried not to. But perhaps the past never truly disappears. It simply waits until we are calm enough to face it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the script small, neat, and surprisingly gentle. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I've lost enough pride to face myself. In prison, time doesn't move like it does outside. It's slow, cold, and merciless. I've had many hours to think about greed, about arrogance, about how I destroyed the only person who never wished me harm. You once said, when you look down on others, you're digging your own grave. I understand now, Margaret, and I'm living in the very hole I dug. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that every night when the lights go out, I picture you sitting in that lavender garden, moonlight on your silver hair. I wish I could return to the first day I stepped into your home just to say, thank you for letting me be part of your family. But I chose another path, the one that cost me everything. Ethan hasn't visited. I understand and I don't blame him. Sometimes we must lose everything to learn gratitude. Today I started a writing class. They say writing can be a form of redemption. Maybe I'll write about you not as an enemy, but as the woman who taught me the final lesson that justice and kindness can exist together, if you can. I only ask this when you look back, don't see, just the one who betrayed you. Remember, I was also the girl, one standing in your kitchen fumbling to make tea the way you liked it. Thank you for not killing the humanity in me with hatred. Amanda. I set the letter down and sat quietly for a long time. My heart beat slow and heavy, but not with anger. Perhaps finally she understood. Perhaps light finds its way not only to the good, but also to those lost souls who stop and turn around. I stepped out into the garden. The lavender no longer bloomed, only dry stems shivering in the wind. Yet the scent lingered in the air, faint and tender, like memory. I whispered to the breeze, George, I have learned the last lesson. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strength to stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. That night, I took out a blank sheet of paper and began to write under the warm glow of my desk lamp. It wasn't a letter of absolution, but one soul speaking to another. Amanda, I received your letter. I read every line, no anger, no tears, only a quiet ache, like seeing a storm's aftermath and realizing you're still standing. Thank you for writing. Thank you for not blaming anyone else. You may not believe this, but I never wished you suffering. I only wished you'd face the consequences and discover the value of what is right. You said you wanted to write, so write. Let your pen be your way out. If your words help you rediscover yourself, that's already a beginning. I forgive you, Amanda. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let resentment own what's left of my life. Keep living, but this time live honestly. I folded the letter, sealed it, and mailed it. As I stepped out of the post office, I felt strangely light, as though I'd finally set down a stone that had weighed on my heart for 10 years. A week later, Ethan came to visit. He saw the spare envelope on my desk and asked Mom, who's this for? I smiled softly. Amanda. He froze. You forgave her. I looked at him, my voice calm. Forgiveness isn't approval, Ethan. It's release. I don't want hatred living in me any longer. She's serving her sentence. The rest is between her and time. He bowed his head silent for a while. Then he squeezed my hand. You're right. Maybe I need to learn to forgive too, not for her, but for myself. I smiled. Now you understand. We sat together for a long time, watching the garden where new lavender shoots were beginning to push through the damp soil. Months later, I received a small package from the Phoenix facility. Inside was a blue notebook and a note. To Mrs. Ellison, this is my first draft. Thank you for giving me the faith to begin again. Amanda, I opened it. The first page read, some people enter our lives to teach us pain, but through their refusal to retaliate, they also teach us compassion. I closed the notebook and looked toward the window. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass, catching the sapphire bracelet resting in its velvet box. The blue light shimmered softly, not as a reminder of loss, but as a heartbeat of quiet peace. I knew then that my story had truly ended, not with punishment, but with forgiveness and healing. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city sparkled beyond the glass. Ethan texted me, I love you, Mom. Thank you for teaching me what real strength is forgiveness. I replied, I love you too, Ethan. Remember, when you forgive, you set yourself free. I set the phone down and gazed outside. The night wind carried a faint hint of lavender. Seattle's sky shimmered silver, and I could almost feel George nearby. Perhaps in the breeze that gently stirred the curtain, I closed my eyes and smiled. No more tears, no more hatred, only peace, simple and quiet as breath. My story had come to an end, but that blue light, the light of justice, of faith, of compassion, still shines on in every heart that once lost its way. If you were me, a woman once dismissed, once stripped of her voice, who had to rise again in the twilight of her life to reclaim justice, what would you do? Would you have the courage to speak up? Or would you choose silence, the way I once did for so many years? Put yourself in my place for a moment. When family betrays you, when trust is shattered into dust, would you be strong enough to forgive? Or would you let resentment define the rest of your life? I truly want to know what you think. If you believe that justice and compassion can coexist, leave the number one in the comments and share your thoughts about this journey. If my story moved you or made you see life from a different angle, please like this video and follow the channel so you won't miss the real stories, the lessons of resilience, empathy, and human strength that I'll share next. Because sometimes it only takes one story to change the way we see the world.